education at FreeFrom. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. What I do is I work in different training, support, and technical assistance capacities for the IPV movement. So I work with agencies, shelters, drop-in services, hotlines, coalitions, all that type of stuff to do trainings around financial security building for survivors. And I'm gonna let my colleague introduce herself, Amy.
Thanks, Tanya. My name is Amy Durrance. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Director of Systems Change Initiatives here at FreeFrom. And what that means is, you guessed it, I do all the systems change work. So that looks like anything from policy work at the state level to the federal level, and also looking at our friends and colleagues in the private sector and basically helping them create better products, policies, and systems to be better supportive of survivors in the private sector. Really excited to be here with y'all today.
And we also have Sharon Lim joining in the chat. So she will be providing technical support in the chat and moderating the chat in the Q&A. Just a quick housekeeping. Please use the Q&A. There's a separate Q&A function on your menu bar. Please use that to drop in questions, because sometimes when you drop them in the chat, we'll miss them. So please make sure to use the Q&A for questions. And the chat, feel free to introduce yourself, where you're joining us from. If you're representing an agency, feel free to do that. The chat is really here for y'all to connect with each other, share contact information. A lot of exciting things happen in the chat, so I definitely encourage you to look at that, because FreeFrom is not the only expert in a lot of this work, and there are a lot of experts on this call who are doing amazing things, and will probably share via the chat what they're doing and best practices that they've acquired along the way. Okay, so let's get started. Oh, okay, that was a fun noise. I don't know if y'all heard that. Oh, there we go. Figured it out. Okay, so let's get started with the grounding. So we're going to be talking about things that might feel a little difficult for folks. So it's always good to ground ourselves in the space. So let's take a few deep breaths. Close your eyes if you want to. Sit comfortably, or choose a body position that feels good for you. You could tell I'm excited because my breathing is a little faster. So I'm sorry about that, y'all. Please guide yourself in your breaths in the best way that feels good for you and your body. And as you're breathing, check in with yourself. How are you feeling? What are you bringing with you to the session? And what do you want to leave behind so that you can be here present with us in this virtual space? And let your last few thoughts finish up. Look around. Drink some water if you're feeling any sensations in your body to bring your body back, or something warm, something cold typically helps. And then we're going to move on. So today's agenda, we're going to start with first a reflection question, then an introduction to FreeFrom. Then we're going to jump into some economic abuse statistics for survivors and service providers that are relevant to the information that we'll be talking about today. And then the exciting part that I know many of y'all have probably seen social media posts about and are very curious to know how and why we're doing certain workplace practices and benefits at FreeFrom. And then how to replicate these benefits to create a survivor-centered workplace. So pretty much how can you take what you're learning in this session and apply it to where you work. So if this is your first time joining a FreeFrom webinar, you know that we love our reflection questions and engagements. Just because we're virtual doesn't mean we don't want to get to know you. So before we get started, and feel free to answer this in the chat, what comes up for you when you hear, read, or see the phrase survivor-centered workplaces. What comes up for you when you hear, read, or see the phrase survivor-centered workplaces? I'll give y'all a few moments to type away. So yes, it looks like, make sure that you are sending it to panelists and attendees. So there's like a little blue box on top of where you type a message that you can click and then select panelists and attendees to make sure that it goes to everybody. Otherwise, just we see it and we don't want your amazing words to get lost. Sharon, could you read maybe just 2 or 3 responses in the chat for me?
Yeah, so some of the things that we're seeing are workplace policies that are supportive of survivors' needs. We have Kayla who said collective care. Safety is one that we're seeing over and over.
Thank you. And those are completely right. We're still working on a definition, I think, for survivor-centered workplaces, but I think y'all got the core of it, which is creating workplaces that really center survivor experiences and supports their healing. So whether that means helping them feel safe, helping them feel supported, giving them the tools and agency to do whatever healing is meaningful to them, so on and so forth. So everything that y'all already mentioned. So a little bit about FreeFrom. We envision a world where survivors have sustaining income, savings, and credit with which to build wealth and the resources to support individual, intergenerational, and community healing. To that end, we have a holistic approach using technology, peer-to-peer networks, training programs for IPV agencies, policy advocacy, social enterprise models, and cross-sector solutions. I know we do a lot, but I promise we are a tiny but mighty team. So let's jump into some stats. So why we are here today is because up to 60% of survivors lose their job as a result of the harm that they were subjected to. That's a big percentage. It's a lot of survivors who are losing jobs. And if you really think about, you know, what is the role of employers or jobs in this space, it's really to look at this number and think about how can we reduce this percentage and really support survivors who are experiencing harm or who have been subjected to harm, and how can we keep them safe and help them in their healing journey and help them retain their jobs. You know, money is important in the healing process. Why is money important in the healing process? So the lifetime costs of intimate partner violence, including the cost of related health problems, lost productivity, and criminal justice, is about $104,000 for women and about $23,000 for men. And this is for cis women and for cis men. And this is a study that the CDC put out. That's quite a lot of money that somebody loses just because they were subjected to intimate partner violence. So if you're thinking about, you know, all the long-term ramifications of being subjected to violence, that's a big cost. That's a lot of debt that you are acquiring just because you survived violence. So again, losing your job, having all this debt is not really going to be productive to someone's healing journey. On the other hand, so a lot of you may be service providers from the intimate partner violence movement or the gender-based violence movement in joining us today. We did a study, so we are doing a study coming out very soon. And we learned that 1 in 2 of all the service providers that are working in this movement are survivors themselves. So that's 1 in 2. So that's a little bit of a larger survivor population than our national average, which is 1 in 4. So I really want to hone in that service providers who are working in the movement are very likely survivors themselves. And we also, as a movement, need to create employment spaces that are survivor-centered and survivor-informed. So what does this all mean? Prioritizing financial security in the IPB movement begins with acknowledging the high rates of survivorship and financial insecurity among staff and meaningfully investing in their well-being. So before we get started, I really want us to first take a look at our traditional employment spaces. For those of you who are familiar with like all the power and control dynamics that happen in gender-based violence situations, I want you to compare the two. So how does capitalism or traditional employment mirror some of the power and control dynamics of gender-based violence? So let's think about this critically. So maybe in your head, you're picturing, the power and control wheel that we all learn about in our 40-hour training, or that you've seen in some sort of training. So go through it in your mind and compare it to where does traditional employment or capitalism mirror some of the power and control dynamics. And you can type it in the chat. I can't see if we're getting responses, but Sharon, would you be able to read a few for me, please?
Sure. It says employer
Oh.
slash abuser needs. So the needs of the employer slash abuser over your individual needs, needing both your job and an abusive partner for financial support. We're seeing hierarchies at work, women getting paid less than cis men, having to deal with terrible conditions to get resources to live, dependency on job. Some workplaces control dress and require them to walk on eggshells.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. And I'm so sorry I changed the slide. I can't figure out how to go back to the other slide, having technical difficulties over here. But yes, you are all correct. I think it's important to name that there's still a lot of harm happening, a lot of violence happening in traditional employment spaces, and because of just the way that our country is. And really hold all those challenges in your mind as we're thinking about how can we innovate and create a survivor-centered workplace. So I'm going to hand it over to Amy to cover a few slides here.
Thanks so much, Tanya. Okay, so Tanya sort of alluded to this already, but at FreeFrom, much of our work is to expand the ecosystem of support available for survivors in the US. And part of that work is our partnerships with employers to basically help them better support their staff who are or have been subjected to gender-based violence. So basically, we're calling on employers to take responsibility for their role to play in disrupting the cycle of intimate partner violence. And FreeFrom is an employer too. And the majority of our team are survivors. And so as we're calling on employers externally, to do this work, to take responsibility, we also have to take responsibility and accountability as an employer ourselves as FreeFrom. We're serious about our mission and commitment to building financial security for survivors. So we really put our values into action internally by creating policies and offering benefits that build and support the financial security, well-being, and safety of every single one of our team members. So put another way, we prioritize the financial security of our staff by ensuring that FreeFrom is a survivor-centered workplace. And so how do we do that? Well, you can see here from this slide, these are some of the benefits that we offer our staff. And I'm saying some of the benefits we offer our staff, but I am one of the staff people that gets to, benefit from these benefits. But basically, you can see from this slide some of the things that we offer. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on some of these throughout this presentation. But if we don't cover one that you're really interested in and today, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to connect and talk about those in more detail offline. So we see these benefits here, and while benefits are really important, they're not sufficient to truly be a survivor-centered employer organization. So in addition to offering these types of benefits, offering certain policies, we also are very intentional about involving every single one of our team members in conversations about new policies, new benefits, or revisiting policies and benefits to see if they need to be changed or tweaked or improved. And I'll give you some examples of what that looks like as we go through the rest of the presentation. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide and we'll dig into some of these policies and benefits in a little more detail. Okay, so removing probationary periods. So probationary periods, what are they? Well, typically it's a period at the beginning of someone's employment from 3 to 6 months, starting from day one, that are typically they're said to be an opportunity to see if that employee is a good fit. And typically employees do not get access to benefits during that probationary period. So if you want to just quick in the chat say, because I have been subject to a probationary period before in employment, if you want to just drop in the chat, yes, same here, or me, so we can all see how many of us have experienced a probationary period. So why are we basically, whenever we talk to an employer, we advocate for them to remove, look at all these in the chat, good grief, see, everybody knows what we're talking about. Everybody has experienced probationary periods just about. So when we're talking to employers, we're always advocating to remove probationary periods. And why do we do that? Well, as you can see from the slide, being a survivor is really expensive, as Tanya mentioned already through earlier slides, and not having access to critical employment benefits from the start of a new job can worsen violence or economic impacts of surviving violence. It also, by removing probationary periods, you really help a new employee feel safer and more at ease with new employment. And then survivors who are working can access medical care, vacation, and sick days so they can more fully show up for their work. And also, not on this slide, but something we should pause and really consider, aren't probationary periods really mirroring abuse? Right? Restricting access to financial support, essentially telling someone that they have to prove that they're worth things like health insurance, healthcare. And so you can go on and move to the next slide. So at FreeFrom, there are no probationary periods. When we hire someone, we hire them because we think they're going to be a great fit and we want them to thrive. We want them to thrive from day one. And it's really difficult to feel like you're part of a team, to come with your whole self, to really be able to thrive if you're feeling like they're not even really sure about you yet. They're restricting access to what you can have. You've got to prove yourself. So for all these reasons, FreeFrom does not have any probationary periods. And so that means that when anyone starts at FreeFrom on day one, they can access all of our benefits. Unlimited vacation, well, we'll get into all the benefits, but they can access every single one of them on day one. Okay. You can go to the next slide. All right, so here's a quote from an advocate, something that they shared with us about financial security and how that impacts work. I'm gonna actually read this quickly. I feel like if we were all financially secure, that we could all work better, because we wouldn't have to worry about that car bill that's due next week and stuff like that. And then we could just focus more on the clients and not have to be stressed out about how we're gonna keep paying our bills. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And an important part of building the financial security of your staff is paying a living wage. And so why do we at FreeFrom pay a living wage, and why should everyone pay a living wage? You feel like it's kind of obvious, but we'll go through some points, right? So the nonprofit movement is not sustainable. I'm sure everyone on this call understands really intimately this problem, but it's not sustainable, and the high burnout and turnover that comes with underpaying staff costs nonprofits money and productivity gaps, rehiring costs, and training costs. And so if you just pay folks a living wage to begin with, you're going to eliminate paying all of those other costs that are associated with not paying people enough. Also, we at FreeFrom are committed to hiring QT BIPOC folks and supporting their healing. And we understand that as a result of a long history of laws steeped in white supremacy and cis heteronormativity, that for QT BIPOC folks, there are more obstacles to financial security than there are for others. So it is essential that if we are really, committed to not only hiring QT BIPOC folks, but also ensuring that they're able to thrive and heal, we've got to be paying folks a living wage. We also know that most employees spend an average of 8 hours a week while at work worrying about money. And so paying well is good for productivity. Love it when there's like a moral reason to do something. It's the right thing to do, and you get a good business perk out of it too. It's good for your business. You're going to have folks that are more loyal to your organization. You're going to have folks that are able to bring their whole self to their work. They're not worrying about money. They're going to be able to really be there for their clients and the folks that they're supporting. And you can check out what the living wage is in your county through the MIT Living wage calculator. We've got there at the bottom. I really recommend folks play around with it. It's really interesting and really shows how far we have to go as a society and making sure that folks have enough money or being paid enough money to live. Okay. All right, so what's FreeFrom's living wage commitment? Well, at FreeFrom, we've got a salary floor of $65,000, and that's not including benefits. And this is for all employees, regardless of position, regardless of education level. Everybody gets, at the very least, $65,000 a year. And as you can see from here, there's no safety without financial security, and there's no financial security without a source of income. So really, by paying staff a living wage, you're helping keep them safe. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. All right, we've got another quote here from an advocate. I've seen a lot of staff who have health issues who prefer not to go to the doctor because they don't have the means. So this also shows how not paying folks enough, not paying folks a living wage has widespread implications. This is just one example. It can really impact folks' health. Folks avoid going to the doctor because they can't afford it. You know, maybe they even are in a position where they have to wait and delay to take their kids to the doctor because they can't afford it. And so it really just puts people in a bad position. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about California's Little Hoover Commission. So what in the world is that? Why are we talking about it? California's Little Hoover Commission is a state commission that basically is tasked with evaluating the way that the state of California is handling its programs. So basically, the Little Hoover Commission looks at California's responses to certain things and grades them, evaluates them, tells them how they're doing. And last year, they were doing a deep dive into how the state was responding to intimate partner violence. And at the beginning of last year, before COVID, we as FreeFrom were invited to come and give written and oral testimony to the Little Hoover Commission about how California could improve its response in the IPV space. And as a result of our testimony, the Little Hoover Commission made a formal recommendation to the state legislature that any grants made by the state to IPV service providers should have enough funds in those grants to cover living wages for everyone who's operating under that grant. So let me just pause for a second because that's kind of a convoluted sentence. But essentially, the Little Hoover Commission said, hey, California, this is something you should really do. When you're making state grants for folks to use to do work to end intimate partner violence, you have got to make sure you've got enough money in those grants so that everybody working under that grant is getting paid a living wage. And you can see this great quote that they included in their final report. At a minimum, state administered grants must provide a living wage to service providers, not a survival wage, but a wage that allows them to live safely and healthfully in their community, obtain good health insurance, cover childcare and transportation expenses, and save for retirement. And so we're really excited about, and you can read the full report at that link at the bottom. We're very excited about this pledge, and we're committed to working with the Little Hoover Commission and the state legislature to ensure that this actually becomes a mandate. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, now we're on ample paid vacation. Why? Well, employees need time to rest and enjoy themselves outside work. Who needs that? I sure do. Putting a cap on, that's right, putting a cap on this important time, it doesn't help people's effort, and you don't perform better by working all the time and never taking a break. And also working in this space, working in this movement, this is high stress work. This is emotionally taxing work. This work is very difficult to do. So people need time to regroup, to refresh, to recover, to heal themselves. You can go ahead to the next slide. So at FreeFrom, we have an unlimited paid vacation policy, which is really amazing, y'all, I gotta tell you. And so all employees get unlimited paid vacation from the very first day they start working here. And I've gotta say, it's not just this policy, right? Our CEO and our directors are very intentional about holding people accountable for taking time off. It'll be like, hey, just wanted to check in. And that sounds kind of more ugly than it is. It's actually quite a nice accountability. But it's like, you know, I'll have our CEO say, "Hey, Amy, I've noticed that you haven't taken any days off in a while, and you know, I'm invested in your well-being, and I want you to be invested in your well-being." And I mean, literally, I've had this conversation with my CEO. So we do have a commitment, and it's not enough to just have it on the books. We live it, we model it, because we know that that is how you can show up best for your job and for your clients. Okay. All right, menstrual leave. So why do we have menstrual leave at FreeFrom? Well, people who have uteruses can experience pain and shouldn't have to work through that pain. And when you're having menstrual pain, you aren't sick and you're definitely not on vacation. And so you shouldn't have to deplete those days that are accrued specifically for those purposes. And without this policy in place, folks who do have uteruses are going to be using sick time, depleting vacation, and that's just not equitable. And you can go on to the next slide. So here is where I was going to bring up this is a great time for me to talk about our process internally at FreeFrom as well. So we have a FreeFrom unlimited menstrual leave policy, meaning that any staff person with a uterus can take off any time that they are menstruating when they're in pain. And this policy, shout out to Hey Sun if you're on this webinar, this policy resulted because one of our new hires within the first week at FreeFrom, we were all in a staff meeting, and she brought up, oh, you know, I've heard of in other countries, folks have menstrual leave. And we talked about it as a group and we said, yes, we need that. And we made it a policy. So that's an example of how, and this was literally her first week at FreeFrom. So everyone's voice is valued. Everyone's contributions are considered and discussed because everyone is a valued member of the team and everyone should have a say in the benefits and the policies that are going to impact them. Also, you should see down there, we don't ask for proof. So go ahead to the next slide. Okay, gender-based violence, paid and protected leave. So why do folks need paid and protected leave for gender-based violence? Well, folks who are experiencing harm need time off to address that harm. I mean, there's any number of things that come up that are urgent matters that you've got to deal with during work hours. And so it is essential that folks have time off to address the consequences of harm. And they shouldn't have to use their sick leave. They're not sick. They shouldn't have to use their vacation leave. They're not on vacation. And so for that reason, you can go ahead and put it on the next slide. At FreeFrom, we have a policy where all staff have access to 10 days of paid and protected time off to address the consequences of being subjected to gender-based violence. And this is really the one that I wanted to highlight, that we don't require any proof. Oftentimes when folks need to access, whether it's a benefit at work or a resource or a service somewhere, as a survivor, they're required to produce some kind of proof of what they experienced or what they were subjected to. Well, at FreeFrom, we understand that 53% of survivors said that they do not have any kind of proof about what they experienced or what they were subjected to. And that means that if you require that kind of proof to access benefits at your job, right then, a little over half of survivors would not be able to access those benefits. So that's a really important piece of this. Also, we partner with employers to implement this policy. So while we're asking employers externally to give these kind of benefits and give these kind of policies for their employers, we're also doing it internally at FreeFrom. Okay, next one. All right, so how is FreeFrom doing with all of these benefits, with all of this time off, with all of, you know, all of this stuff? Are we getting anything done? Are we, Tanya? Let's see. Yes, we are thriving. Okay, so being committed to our staff's financial and emotional well-being has allowed us to do some amazing things. And let me give you some highlights. So with all of these benefits, with all of this time off, you know, with all of these things, we've trained 172 service providers nationally. We've started the largest national direct cash aid program for survivors through our safety fund. We published a groundbreaking report with data from 1,300 survivors who applied for the safety fund. We launched our National Survivor Financial Security Policy Map and Scorecard tech tool. We retained all of our staff and in fact have added 4 new staff members. And we surpassed our fundraising goal. So as you can see, all of these things have in fact led to us thriving. And what you won't see on here, but what's coming down the pipeline for us at FreeFrom is our next safety fund round. We're actually going to be really focusing on employment and survivors who are working and what that looks like and what policies employers might have that are unintentionally exacerbating the experience of harm, and what employers are doing that's really supporting survivors, and what survivors' true lived experience in the workplace really is. So be on the lookout for that. We're really excited. That's going to be what we're calling our Survivor Employee Manifesto, and we're going to be able to back up all of these benefits with even more data after we've been able to put that out. All right. I'm going to turn, oh, nope, I got one more thing. Okay, and so we're not the only ones thriving. So this is just a story quickly about the CEO of a payments company who 6 years ago cut his $1 million salary down by 90% and raised all of his staff paid to a minimum of $70,000. People said they would go under. People said it would never work. Well, they are also thriving 6 years later. And as you can see from the slide, their headcount has doubled, and the value of the payments the company is processing has gone from 3.8 billion to 10.2 billion. Also, there has been their revenue has tripled. There's been but you can also see the impacts on the actual staff. So employees had a 10x boom in homes purchased, and as you can see from the slide, since the announcement, they've had more than 40 babies. Before that, they were only having 0 to 2 babies born a year. So the CEO was really proud of that as a way to show like our staff is really living and really thriving, and so is our company. Okay, Tanya, now I am turning it over to you.
So how do you do this? How can you start incorporating some of these survivor-centered workplaces practices? There is no magic formula or solution. I feel like I always hate to say that, and I wish there was a magic formula and solution. But look, every workplace is different. Every state is different. Every work culture is different. So you are the best person to kind of feel out what kind of, things do I have to do at this workplace to make some of these policies begin to happen or practices begin to happen. So this work really needs a deep commitment from leadership and board members. I have to say that. So our CEO, our board is very, very committed, and all our directors are, like Amy said. So if you don't have that support, it can be very, very difficult when it's starting from, like, for example, direct line staff or direct service staff, and trying to come up all the way to leadership can be a long tasking process. So having commitment from leadership and board members really makes a difference. It also requires us to get uncomfortable and sometimes unpack inconvenient truths. So that goes with, like, how might we be, causing harm unintentionally in our current work practices? And it's difficult to face these truths, but it's very, very important when you're really trying to create change at this level. And also remembering that this is a systemic issue. So this is not necessarily the fault of the people who are working in these places. Specifically in the gender-based violence and IPV movement, the value that society places on this work and their hesitation to talk about survivor wealth is a huge barrier. So funders may not see a point in, like, paying living wages, right? Society may not see a point in paying living wages for the nonprofit world. And that's a very real systemic barrier that we all have to take a piece in kind of dismantling. You also have the right to be critical of funders and honest about your investment in staff survivors. So we are very, very honest. Like, we are about our mission. So we are going to make sure that we are investing in our staff in the same way, and making sure that we can educate our funders. And if the funder doesn't align with that, then that's okay. They're not the best funder for us. And I know it can be difficult when you're working in a movement that isn't very well funded to walk away from funders. But trust me that when you live honestly and you really commit in investing in your staff, that money's going to come back to you in a different way. And also letting go of these industry standards or comparable salaries and benefits. So we hear that a lot, that's one of the biggest ways that a lot of, not just in the gender-based violence movement, but in the nonprofit world, they're looking to other folks to see what can we do and what should we do. You really got to let go of that, because we're all not doing great. And if we're, like, looking at other folks, then we're going to just keep perpetrating very low wages, below living wages. We're going to not be providing benefits in survivor-informed and trauma-informed ways. So it really requires us to let those go and really envision something beyond them. And just remembering that we all have a part to play. Doesn't matter where you are, if you're a community member, if you are a person who's currently employed, or you're a person who's looking for a job. Really think about, like, what is my part to play in all of this? So what can your organization do now? So here are some very simple things that you can start doing now to start committing yourself to survivor-centered workplaces. So a very easy one is offer birthdays as an automatic paid day off. So we do that. It's great. We know if it's somebody's birthday, we can, already count on them being off work that day. Audit your employee handbook annually to ensure your workplace practices and policies match your agency's values and mission. So literally sit there with your mission and then your employee handbook and go through it and be like, where might we be perpetrating some power and control dynamics? Where is this coming from? Is it just because another agency is doing it and we feel like we have to do it, and so on and so forth? So really take a critical audit at your current employee handbook. Challenge the norms of your workplace and evaluate which practices are necessary, reasonable, and which were created from a place of mistrust. So a lot of times we don't trust our workforce. Why is that? Really ask yourself, why are we mistrusting our workforce? And that goes for things like probationary periods, right? So probationary periods feels like a mistrust in your workforce. So really thinking about removing probationary periods and grant full benefits from the start. Ask staff how they want to be supported. So we do that a lot. We do that like in a lot of our staff meetings, and we talk about our benefits like Amy mentioned. So even just starting to talk about these things can be a really great step in the right direction. If you don't feel comfortable doing it publicly, like maybe you don't have that type of workplace environment yet, maybe try considering some anonymous surveys, maybe bringing it up during employee reviews when it's a one-on-one conversation, and if you're comfortable in more public staff meeting spaces. Other things that you can do is offer flexible work schedules with work from home options whenever possible. We all learned that this is possible during the pandemic, right? So that people can flex their workplaces and work from home when they can. So continuing to do that is a great way to really support survivors. And encourage folks to take time off and role model it. So that's the hardest part, especially if you're a manager. Role modeling it is the hardest part, but if you are seeing that your staff are struggling with taking time off, really think about, wait, am I taking time off? Because if I'm not taking time off, that's probably why they're struggling and they're thinking that it's not okay. So encouraging folks to take time off and role modeling it really helps. Help staff evaluate their workloads to ensure that they have time to take care of themselves. Another challenge might be they just don't feel like they have enough time to take time off. So working with your team or your staff or your supervisor to really look at your workload, and maybe even if you want to plan together your vacations, if that feels safer for you, then definitely feel free to do that. And then offer opportunities for current employees to be promoted or change roles. So that really helps employees sometimes look forward to something else, right? To think about their future, to think about how do I long-term stay at this agency and stay, happy and productive and not burnt out. Advocate for living wages. Getting to living wages is a whole other thing, but advocating for living wages can happen, with your colleagues. It can happen with your manager. It can happen, at your directors meetings. It can happen at your board meetings. It can happen in many different places. And that looks different for every agency, like I said, but definitely starting to talk about living wages, sharing how much are you getting paid? Wait, how much am I getting paid? Is a great, great way to start talking about it. And create a culture where reporting overtime is encouraged and mandatory. So we hear this a lot, specifically in the gender-based violence movement, where it's like you wanna, if you're talking to a client and they have a lot of things going on, you can't be like, oh, it's 5, I gotta go, like, that's it, we're not talking. And you actually might stay longer, but we've kind of created this like soldiering on, which is coined by somebody else, but kind of like we're here to do great work and we need to put ourselves aside, right? Which is fine. We sometimes do that and often do that for the client, but also being encouraged to report that overtime and get paid for that overtime is important and needed, because we are putting extra work and therefore we should be getting paid for that extra work. So how can you support these changes? So check out the living wage calculator that we dropped in. I think Sharon dropped it in the chat, but drop it in back again, please, Sharon, if you have it. Account for staff living wages, benefits, stipends in your org's budget and in program budget. So the next time you're having your budgets meetings, really think about those changes and how can you, if you need to, slowly start incorporating them. Seek unrestricted grants or general operational grants. That's one of the biggest ways that we are able to do a lot of these things for our staff is that we specifically seek unrestricted grants or general operation grants that don't have those restrictions. Get your board of directors and leadership committed to staff's emotional and financial well-being. Hopefully there's some leaders and directors and board members here who are like, yes, I want to commit to emotional and financial well-being, and that is a great first step. If you don't have them on this call, then finding a way maybe to bring it up to them, or talk to your manager, who can then talk to the director, who can then get access to the CEO, but finding a way to kind of talking about this with them and really helping them understand why this is important can be really helpful. You could also bring us on to train them. So staff or board training to unpack and begin the healing process around economic trauma. So I think a lot of us have economic trauma that makes it hard for us to trust, our colleagues or our workforce, makes it hard for us to want to invest in this way in the people that are working at our agency. So really starting to unpack our personal economic trauma and begin that healing process can really benefit how we are approaching and creating these survivor-centered workplaces. And then just remember that not everyone can easily adapt to change. So think about, how have you handled organizational change in the past? So what worked, what didn't? So think about a time at your agency or your workplace, something changed. Who had a hard time with it? Who had a great time with it? Who had an okay time with it? How did you help those people who were having a harder time kind of get there with you, so on and so forth. So I'm going to read you a quote. So obviously the work has to be about the clients, but if the workers aren't safe and healthy and feeling the best, then the work is going to be impacted. So I think having the organization in particular turn inward in terms of looking at their staff and seeing what they need, giving them more of a voice, and really considering emotional well-being, I think that would go a long way. I think that would help a lot in the terms of wanting to do this work forever. So really think about all the amazing talent, all the amazing people that we are losing, that maybe we would have solved this problem already had we helped them stay, and had we supported their healing journey as well. So really let this person's words sink in and really think about, what this movement could be if we really start investing in our staff. So let's jump into some reflections. So what are some of the benefits that could be transformational to you, your colleagues, and or your workplaces? So of the many that we talked about today, which ones feel transformational? Please feel free to drop them in the chat. Sharon, when you're ready, can you read maybe just one or two for time?
We're seeing the menstrual leave one, medical coverage, all of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm glad y'all are thinking these are going to be transformational for you, and I really hope that they begin to happen. So if you are in a position of power to influence these types of benefits, what is stopping you from implementing these benefits? And if you're comfortable sharing that in the chat, I know that's a little bit more personal and might out you about your role at an agency, but definitely feel free to drop those in the chat. If you aren't ready to really answer this question yet, that's okay. Really think about, why is thinking about these things so difficult for me? Maybe it's something going on at your agency. Maybe it's just something going on at your state. Maybe it's something going on in your life personally. But really think about, what are those fears and where are they coming from? So what are the fears about investing in your staff? And where are they coming from? And these can be difficult to confront. Like I said, this work takes us confronting some difficult concepts and inconvenient truths. So really thinking about it. And Sharon, if you can share if folks are sharing.
We're seeing funding sources, leadership cannot relinquish any power. Leadership doesn't want to do the difficult work. Government grants covering all the salaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sources.
Those are very real ones that we've definitely heard from a lot of different people, but thankfully we're hoping to put out research on this. And I think a lot of leadership and boards and people in power listen to research. So I'm hoping that that can really be of an ally to y'all as y'all are taking on these journeys. And if these benefits seem too difficult to implement, I'm excited to hear about this. What are some other ways your organization can create a survivor-centered workplace and support survivors? So if any of y'all out there have some great practices that you want to share in the chat, or some great ideas that came to you as you were listening to all this information, type away in the chat. Sharon, if you could read a few folks are sharing.
Mental health days, offering work from home ability.
Yeah, mental health days would be cool. That's a good idea. Okay. So thank you all so much for sharing all your ideas, all your thoughts, all your reflections. If you didn't have time or didn't feel comfortable reflecting today, that's okay. I hope you find time, space to reflect on the questions that we asked today and at a later time. So let's finish with another grounding. So I want you to honor the feelings, the thoughts, the memories, and ideas that came up in this training. How do you do that? You know, you might be asking yourself, how do I honor these? You can write them down, you can draw them out, you can sit with them, you can make a to-do list, you can talk about them with someone that you trust. Give them space in whatever way is meaningful to you. Especially, you know, sometimes thoughts, feelings, memories, and ideas can get really loud in our mind. So sometimes just getting them out in some way helps. And then we're going to take a couple deep breaths. I know we talked about some things that might have brought up things we didn't even know were there, or maybe we're really excited right now because we got buzzing with ideas. So take a couple deep breaths, think through your last thoughts, and then we'll move on. All right, so I saw that we were getting a lot of questions. So take it away, Sharon, for questions. And it looks like we got a lot, so hopefully we can get to all of them. But if we can't, please, we'll drop our contact information at the end and we can definitely connect.
I'm going to start from the beginning, and we have a question that says, we have considered unlimited PTO. However, some folks prefer to receive the payout for unused time at the end of the year. Have you grappled with that?
Tanya, do you want to,
yeah, I don't,
okay.
I don't think we pay that out, right?
No, because it's unlimited. You don't pay it out. But I think that I mean, at FreeFrom, we because of our living wage commitment, I feel like, you know, certainly that is a trade-off. I think I saw in the chat some discussion around this about like being able to be flexible enough to offer folks the option so they can choose how they want to, like how the employee wants to do time off. But I think as far as FreeFrom goes, you know, we're paying people a living wage. So employees aren't having to think about things like, okay, well, I need to not take vacation so I can save up that vacation time so then I can get that money when I leave, because we're paying people enough, we're calculating what a living wage is. If you can't or are unable to do that, I do think I saw in the chat that like I said, offering that flexibility. I think it's all about open communication and honesty and trying to create space for someone so that they can answer you honestly too. Like, so unpacking things like, I want to make sure you don't feel like there's a right answer to these questions, or that you feel pressure to answer in one way or the other when you're, when you're talking with your manager about an employment decision. So I'm sorry, I don't know that that's necessarily that helpful, but that's how we handle it at FreeFrom. It's always been unlimited paid time off, so that we as an organization haven't had to sort of deal with that. But what I saw in the chat, people talking about seemed like a good approach to me, offering flexibility.
Yeah, and I think one thing we didn't really get to talk about is we also give stipends. So we have a vacation stipend, we have a wellness stipend, we have a tech stipend. So people can access those bigger chunks of cash in different ways. And I think that that's kind of like how we give folks that access still. But I should have mentioned that these are all examples. So this is what works for us and our workforce and our state, and all the circumstances that we're around. These are just ideas, just examples. By no means are we saying you have to do it this way. If anything, I hope it inspires ideas. I hope it inspires conversations, like Amy said, to be honest about these things, to have fair and equitable conversations around these things. So if that's what works for your agency and that's what you're hearing from staff, then I'd listen to them.
And then that translates really well into our next question is, our ED has been pressing staff to take more vacation time. However, staff don't feel supported, like they can walk away from their job for more than a long weekend. What sorts of things do leadership at FreeFrom do to ensure that staff can take time off?
Sharon, do you want to answer that question?
I will answer this question. So for the three of us who are on the call today, Tanya and Amy are both directors, and I work with Tanya under her as a manager. And something that I really admire about the leadership at FreeFrom from Tanya and Amy and Sonia is that they take time off. They take time off, they take long time off, and it's really great because it allows those of us who are not in leadership positions to feel comfortable to take that time off. So if the question is really just simply, what can leadership do? Take your time off so that people feel comfortable and that you're modeling the behavior that you want your staff to see. And so if you really want staff to take that time off, then you also have to take that time off to show that it's okay. The organization is not going to burn down. Things will run smoothly because there are good teammates in place. And you can take that week off, not do any work, and come back and your job will still be there. Your work will remain the same. And that, it's to everyone's benefit that you take time off. And then something that Tanya told me recently, or maybe it was Sonia, was that when you don't take time off and you become overworked and overburdened, you become other people's problem. So don't be other people's problem and take time off and take care of yourself.
Thank you. And I think what Amy said earlier, having honest conversations around that challenge, like I'm having this challenge, this is why, and then as a leader listening and trying to think, how do we work on this together?
Well, and I even think, and something that I think FreeFrom leadership is pretty good at, is when you first being cognizant of who you're supervising, being cognizant of their schedule, being cognizant of their workload to the extent that you can, being cognizant of, okay, wait a minute, I know that this person hasn't taken time off, and going to them and you starting the conversation and saying, I'm noticing that you haven't taken any time off. Do you feel like you can't? Let's talk about why. Let's plan together and strategize together. Like maybe I can cover something while you're gone, if that's what you're worried about, or someone else on the team can come in, or we can build that time into our project management planning and scheduling. Because it's that important. So I think that that's a big piece too, is not waiting for the conversation to come to you, because a lot of times folks are not going to feel comfortable initiating that conversation. You've got to be the one, you're in the position of power. And I think maybe underlying a lot of these things is, and something that we talk about explicitly in leadership at FreeFrom, is being aware of the power that you hold in the organization. And so that means, identifying when you think that there's someone who is your direct report that hasn't taken time off, and you proactively saying, let's work this out. Let's figure out how we can do this so that you can.
All right, I'm going to move on to the next question. What does protected, in quotes, in paid and protected time mean gender-based violence leave. And then another question that was related was, if FreeFrom offers unlimited PTO already, what is the difference between unlimited PTO and GBV leave? Is the unlimited PTO not protected?
These are great questions that I'm happy to jump in on. So the protected and paid and protected leave essentially means that you can't be fired or retaliated against for taking it. So, you know, because and both of those pieces are very important in leave, right? So especially for survivors, a lot of folks are not going to be able to afford to miss a paycheck to take time off. And most people are definitely not going to be able to afford to take time off if their job might not be waiting for them when they get back. So we always are very intentional about talking about both of those pieces every time we talk about our leave policies, because they're both so essential to having an actually effective policy that's going to work for people. So, and then the other question about FreeFrom offers unlimited PTO. What's the difference between that and a gender-based violence leave? So at FreeFrom, you know, this is how we always talk about the problem externally, because it's correct, it's the right way to talk about it, is when people are addressing the consequences of harm that they were subjected to, they're not on vacation. They're not just like having a personal day. That's a very specific thing that they're having to address that is not their responsibility, or shouldn't be their responsibility. And so we are very intentional about giving a specific leave to, and I think that you know, some people ask about nitty gritty, and it's important. And also one of the things that I think is important about having specific gender-based violence leave is that you're signaling not only to all of your staff, but all of your funders, all of your partners, everyone, that this is important, that this is a reality, that folks need this time. And so I think that in and of itself is a really good value to not only your organization, but funders, the movement, et cetera. I think that is a really important distinction to make. And that's why we make it at FreeFrom.
We have a lot more questions. So this is the last one just because it's the next one. But I just want to say, if you have questions that we didn't answer, please feel free to email us. I'll drop everyone's emails in the chat right after I read this question. So the last question that we have is, your model is an inspiration. We're committed to aligning values and actions by creating and revising policies, practices, and processes that are just and equitable. And of course, as a small nonprofit, we're also bumping against the financial barriers of being able to provide all the benefits that we'd like to. Can you share how FreeFrom was able to build towards that so that other orgs can grow in this direction?
Yeah, I can share a little bit about that. It didn't happen overnight, let me tell you that. And I think Amy's story about how a new staff member came in and you know, proposed something, and we changed our budgets to make sure that was there, the money was there. We started talking about it with funders, so on and so forth. So it just happened kind of slowly. I think we have the luxury of being still a new agency, and we are also very honest about it with our funders. So a lot of our funding comes from private donors, so like foundations, like corporate foundations as well, which tend to be a little bit not so restricting. So funding is a very big issue, right? And that allow us to create budgets that reflect all these benefits and reflect all these practices. So I think that that's one way that we've been able to do it on the money end. And I think as we invest in our staff, our fundraising gets better, right? So like staff are more involved, staff are happier, we're able to show proof of our concepts, so proof of our programs, because staff are really, you know, doing amazing work at our agency. So that's another way to kind of think about it, is like there's going to be a return on investment when we invest in our staff, and really thinking about that as you're projecting for future years.
Well, and just to quickly add, I think FreeFrom, we take it very seriously that it's one of our responsibilities to do this advocacy to funders. Right. So every time we're talking to funders, we're talking about general operating, we're talking about living wages, we're talking about all the reasons that it's important to not undervalue and underpay this very difficult work that people are doing. And so I think that anytime we have a conversation with a funder, that's part of our conversation is that advocacy. And I would just encourage everyone on this call to do the same thing, because the more these funders are hearing about it, the more it's going to be easier over time. Hopefully we'll get to a place where we don't even have to have these conversations anymore, because living wages are part of all grants. And again, that's also part of our advocacy and our systems change work, like with going to the Little Hoover Commission. We also, our policy change recommendations are always very cognizant of that. So I would just encourage everyone on the call, we're all important, players in this space, to be doing this advocacy constantly on behalf of ourselves, but also everyone in the movement.
Thank you. And I think that we're out of time, but please, please, please reach out to Amy and I. We love to have these conversations with folks and really troubleshoot. Like I said, we also provide training around this. Amy's working on a survivor employment manifesto that I think will be a great tool and resource to many of us. We're putting out a research study on service provider experiences and financial well-being in LA coming out next month. So we just keep in touch. I think Sharon dropped in a survey. And you'll also have our emails in the follow-up. So please keep in touch, stay connected on social media, sign up for our service provider news, and we will hear and see from you all soon. So thank you so much for coming, and let us know if you need anything else.
Thanks, everyone.